Hello and welcome to Bird Barrier Live Training. My name is Michael Gallion, and today we are continuing our series on specific pest birds with starlings, non-native European starlings that can be a real problem in the world of bird control. They are a real pain to deal with for uh, different customers, depending on what they're involved with. But before we get started, a couple quick questions to the group out there. First of all, I'm curious as if anybody has done any jobs where starlings were involved. And then even aside from that, I'd like to know where everyone is joining us from across the country and even the world. We have people sometimes that are halfway around the world that join in on these. And so we always appreciate if we can know where you are joining us from. And it looks like every spring and utilities, that was one of them that somebody mentioned, utility vents. They're cavity dwellers, right? Starlings are cavity dwellers, and that's why you will see them get into all kinds of little attic spaces and all kinds of things. Okay, cool. We have people all across the country here, even up into Canada. A lot of Canadians on today, which we really appreciate. Washington State, very good. All right, so I travel a lot, so it's really great to know where all these different areas are. I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, right in the Midwest, but I've been out in California for much longer time now. So most of my life is out here in California, where it's nice and warm, and we keep bird problems going all year round down here, especially with these birds, starlings. Let's take a look here. You know, there's an example of starling. Some of the characteristics of starlings. Sometimes people get a little confused about this bird because they come in a lot of different variations in terms of what they look like, and their color can actually change throughout the year depending on the season. So what we're going to show you next here is a video on starling and to show them in their natural setting. So let's take a look at this video to give you a little more information here. As I mentioned, European starling is what we're talking about here, the non-native species. You'll see them just about anywhere, but in particular in the U.S., most of the problems are related to agriculture with farmland. You'll see these massive murmurations. This is a smaller flock flying in order like this, and then all coming back down to the community grouping. They rarely are just a handful of these birds, but it depends on where they live. Sometimes you will have an independent, smaller group of maybe 10 or 20 that will live in a common community HOA. One thing about these birds is they're very aggressive, and they will overtake other nesting situations and evict the native species out of those nests. And this is what part of the problem with this bird is. And of course, a big concern in the last 20 or 30 years in North America is how many native birds have been displaced by them. They eat a lot of insects. That's what we mean by carnivorous, but their main thing is seeds. And in the food production world and agriculture, this is where the problem is. And with such an unusual amount of ready food available and water and all these structures, they can really get unusually high populations and, again, displace native birds. People who put feeders out in their yards all across North America will soon find starlings overtaking those native birds, so they will put great effort into keeping those out of that situation. They stick around for most of the year in different situations if there is food and water available, and that's where feeding these birds becomes a real problem. So these little suet feeders that people put up a lot of times are overtaken by these type of birds. So there, you've got a basic view there. Let's go back to the slides now. And with any of these presentations that we do, we keep the audience muted. We've got over 30 people here today, and it gets quite confusing, but we're welcome, to have people talk to me here in the studio. We can unmute people towards the end, but if you have any particular questions, put those in the chat box as we go, and I'll be glad to answer those. They're not protected because they're non-native, which means that you can actually get rid of their nest, you can get rid of their eggs, you can trap these birds out and remove everything needed without facing any kind of, breaking any laws, that sort of thing. But they are very aggressive. They build very large nests. They can get up in attics and make these big messes of nesting. But the agricultural areas is really where I've seen most people in bird control have these opportunities to solve big scale problems. The droppings and debris, it can be pretty severe, especially if they're nesting in homes and this sort of thing, and you have to be concerned about that. The nesting instinct to reclaim is very strong for these birds. Once they decide on a territory, they don't want to give up. And then they reproduce at a very high rate. So that's part of the challenge with these birds. We call this imprinting. If you've watched some of the other webcasts so far, we keep coming back to this general habit of the birds. What we mean imprinting, it can be a chemical imprint, of course, with their droppings and the pheromones, but imprinting also has to do with just their memory response for a given area and their conditioning to be drawn back to a specific area as well. So they can really have a strong desire to hold on to whatever they have. Up to 5 offspring per nest is common in the nest. Here's an example where this was a woodpecker hole and starlings have overtaken it. Push the woodpeckers out and of course take over. It's a really good cavity nest for them. And then after about 3 weeks, the offspring will fledge. So you get 5 new birds that are going to enter that flock and continue with the numbers. Trapping is challenging, and when we say it's usually not effective, what I mean by that is when you're dealing with the massive flocks that are related to agriculture or big numbers that are beyond 400 or 500 birds. I mean, trying to trap out in that situation, you're just not going to keep up with their rate of reproduction. But in smaller settings where maybe you have a home that has starlings nesting or an apartment complex where you're seeing the numbers are moving fast, if we trap out some of those residents, it can be helpful. And there are specific ways that you can trap these birds. There are specific traps just for these birds. The key to really solving these big infestation problems is with relocation. So whatever the property is, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that their nesting and their main habitat is taken away if we're going to have any ability to reduce the problem. And this can be a real challenge, of course, the larger and the more industrial the site is. When we get birds like this as a coordinated flock, it can be a real challenge. So in the world of bird control, my job is to, of course, teach your best ability to succeed at business. And sometimes, you've got to be very realistic in your expectation and the customer expectation. Otherwise, you can end up getting into these jobs that are really not going to be very profitable for you. You may have other things that will be more profitable for you to focus on. And what I find in the world of pest control, when pest control customers start having these type of problems, then it's very worthwhile to figure out solutions because you're protecting the whole pest control account. You're also doing bird control as part of that. And to maintain some level of effectiveness for the customer, at least reduce some of the population, you're kind of obligated if you're the general pest control company that has that account. Here's an example I mentioned earlier of the murmurations. There are a lot of videos that are available online. And although this spectacle is pretty amazing to watch, it doesn't really come into play until they have landed, and come in for the night roost. And then whatever structure they're in, we need to go down what the strategy is in solving it. And of course, Bird Barrier, our whole team here is available to help you solve these type of problems. And before you can approach us in solving it, we ask for this strategy checklist, which will be proper photos. Remember, up close photos. Anytime you can find nesting, real heavy pictures of droppings, where the droppings are at their worst, where the birds are perching and roosting, measurements of those structures, because we're going to try to keep them off of those structures. And then, of course, the Google address. And on that address, it's really about us going into Google Earth photos and all those satellite images and looking at the overall picture, especially with starlings. It's rare that we're just focusing in on one structure. All of the properties and surrounding features of like lakes, water, any kind of streams, feeding grounds, farm land that's near your customer really come into play. So here are some of the deterrents that can be used for these birds. Optical gel can be really effective. Now, when I talk to people about using optical gel, people know that I'm a big fan of this product. And it's all rooted in our ability to generate profit for you, as the person who's trying to solve them. I want to show you something here on my phone before we go any further. This is kind of a cool video example. I'm going to go first to a video here. And this is for a customer that had a very severe infestation of starlings. It's in a substation. And all the little cavities that birds could get into, they were nesting. I'm going to play this one more time again so you get the idea of what's going on. Actually, why don't I turn up the volume here? I don't know if you'll be able to hear this. I'll play it one more time. And I think through my microphone here, you might be able to hear this.
You're muted on your...
So you can hear, and then after the problem's solved, these birds have relocated.
Do it one more time?
Yeah, let's try it one more time so you can hear the full effect here. And this is the same property, and it was carefully treated. There was a lot of experimentation that was done. Now, I'll show you a couple quick photos. You get the idea when you get into these cavities, all this equipment, what was going on. And after it's all cleaned out, we see how the optical gel was put in for high pressure nesting. And this has been a great success in order of breaking up nesting cavities. All right, now we go back to the slides here. Aside from optical gel, this is probably going to be your next best friend. Now, if you can seal off their access to the cavities. Now, most of you are not going to be in big industrial sites like the video I just showed you. You will be dealing with, vents like we saw earlier on houses. Now, if you're dealing with ventilation, of course, we know we have to be very careful not to interfere with the outflow of ventilation, especially on a house in the drier vents. Some reason these birds love to get into the drier vents, and it makes sense, right? There's warmth in those vents. If they nest in there, they got this great flow of heat that helps incubate the eggs. It's very comfortable. They're out of the elements. And we have to be careful not to impede any of the ability for the lint and all that. That becomes a fire hazard. So be very careful if you're dealing with starlings and ventilation. But the point is, if they're getting into attic spaces and all these little cavities, the PVC coated mesh is really important that you use coated mesh. You don't want to use the normal hardware cloth. I know a lot of guys still like to use the regular hardware cloth, but it's so much better to use the PVC mesh because it's coated and it holds up for many more years, and it won't cause rust transfer onto things that you are attaching it to. And in general, with it being black out like this with the black coating, it's much more hidden to the human eye. Flex track can be used, and every bird hates to get a jolt from flex track, but it can be tricky because you want to be able to know exactly where they're placing their feet and exactly in confined areas. We can't just cover massive long runs unless the entire flock is landing on poles where we can just put specific lines in on the track that can be controlled in short areas. That's one of the keys to flex track. Bird slide can work as well. That can be a good deterrent as well. So those are the main deterrents. Of course, netting off so that birds cannot get in. I always come back to stealth net is the pillar of bird control. If you can net off access to the nesting areas, you're going to get really good results. And Stealth Net has its warranty for 10 years. If you do the hardware and everything proper on the Stealth Net install, you're going to get great results for that. Now, as far as Starlings, there's not a whole lot more I really have to offer in terms of bird control. We could go into a lot more of their biology, but the thing that you just need to know is if you're dealing with a starling problem, the good thing is that you can get rid of their eggs, and you've got to get rid of any of the eggs. You've got to get rid of those so that they don't hatch. As far as going forward with your specific projects, lean on us as much as you can, because there are probably 1,000 different ways where we have seen starlings become a problem in all these different settings over the years. And we have a lot of results that once we see maybe an attic feature where they've gotten in, how you'll go about that specific thing. If you've got good photos, we can help you. Mauricio has asked, how do we contact you for problems? So first thing I want to do is put up my email, because the best way for you to get a hold of me is to email me that checklist. I'm going to go back one more time to this checklist again, if you don't mind. Let's look at that strategy checklist. Please, I need to have good photos. And remember, the photos that you email, make sure they're not just from far away. A picture of a house, maybe with a little circle where they're getting in, that can be somewhat helpful, but I got to see the other side. And as a pest control professional, that's part of your job, is to get up into those crawl spaces, the attic spaces, places where the customer doesn't really want to get into. You've got to go up into those attic spaces and really inspect carefully and get good photos. We want to see the nest. If we see the nest, their droppings and the eggs, or the heavy dropping areas if they're just perching, we want to see those. There is an ability for you to mount your phone on poles. We're going to be showing you, there's a session that's going to be coming up about doing proper inspections. And I just went to Arizona and I had several inspections that I did where I was able to put my phone onto a pole, a 30-foot pole, and get that up in the air and be able to inspect that way. That can be very helpful, those close-up photos. We want to have measurements. And when I say measurements, I'm not saying you even have to get out, a tape measure. Of course, I use a laser measuring device on structures. Those are great. I mean, they're a bit of an investment, but there are good ones available where you just hold the device and then point the laser to the wall and you get your measurements. We just need rough measurements. Is it 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet? We need that general measurement of the area that needs to be treated in the Google address. Remember, when you got those, then go ahead and email those to me. You can also, separate of me, of course, in the East Coast, east of the Mississippi, we have Ray. So let's go ahead and put Ray's email up here. Ray has been with the company a long time, and there are sites that he can visit sometimes. Of course, I visit sites. During the pandemic, we have switched everything to virtual, and this is another big part of doing these inspections. Not only can you get give Ray a call, if you're going to be visiting the place the next day, the secret weapon is FaceTime. Now, not everyone has an iPhone, but I believe that on the Android phones, Zach, Zach's our producer on our shows here from the studio.
You would have
So there are different apps available on Android so that you can actually go live with your camera. And then I love to get FaceTime when you go in on your inspection and visit that place with you in real time. That's another great thing that we're doing a lot more of. And we're going to show some videos on how to do that and also help you with the poles and the supplies so that you can get up high without getting up on a ladder. That is basically it. You know, you can call into our 800 number as well, and there's Tony Jeton. He gets, a lot of information from customers to help them solve, as well as Matt Ergel is another one on our team that is all part of estimating. As far as intents, do starlings attack other birds? It depends on each situation. If it's a restaurant situation, man, they get very aggressive. If there's food involved and other birds are entertaining the idea of sharing that same food source, the starlings and grackles generally win that fight, and man, they will battle. So it can be pretty intense. So if you're talking about a situation where food is involved, now when birds are going up in ventilation nesting or they're doing their own nesting and creating their own nesting, then they generally have already kind of established themselves in that area. If there's a food situation that they're coming into, they'll first overtake the native population and try to steal their nest, and it's very aggressive. As far as their aggressiveness on humans, they're known to be somewhat aggressive if you start tampering with them. You tamper with their eggs in that, so you want to make sure if you're getting rid of eggs and you're in their nesting area, you want to wear some eye protection just in case. They're not like grackles. Grackles can be even more aggressive in terms of their attacking when you're trying to do some kind of bird abatement situation for starlings. Any other questions out there? I'd love to know of any particular jobs out there. If anybody has a job coming up and they're not sure of how to do the job, I'd love to talk to you. Maybe you could talk to me live. We'll get you a microphone up and we'll talk about that job. Let's see, Sheldon says, have you advised on winter night roosting starlings drawn to a heat source? Well, all birds, including starlings, have a tendency to go towards the heat sources. And of course, for the nesting cavities, starlings will tend to break through attic areas and get into insulation. But lighting sources are usually the heat source of preference for all birds. Starlings like cavities, so there has to be somewhat of a cavity involved, whereas pigeons will just nest right on top of a lighting structure. If there's a light box that's generating some heat, they'll nest right on top of that, and they don't necessarily need a cavity. But starlings will really want that inner cavity. They love to get into open Spanish tile when there are gaps. Sometimes they'll get in there, but usually the eaves of roofs. Let's see here. Marisa says, we will quote in chicken farms. Send me pictures. Yeah, we're thinking of eagle eyes and optical gels in some areas. So that's good. I like that you're already thinking about your solutions. With the photos, like I described, we'll be able to help you. Not only help you, one thing that I like to do that's different than some of the other people here at Bird Barrier is I like to take it a step further. And that is, if you're not sure about what to charge for these jobs, I can give you some good ballpark figures. I've been doing a lot of research into how to be very competitive compared to people out there, that you're going to go up against. One of the things that if you have Bird Barrier certification, if you've gone through a whole training, that's going to give you a good solid advantage on your proposals. But I want to help you be able to sell these jobs. That's what this is all about. I want everyone here, if you've joined us today because you've got a starling job and you're not sure, let me help you sell the job. I will help you with strategy. Ray will help you with strategy. Tony will all help you with the strategy. Then you get a proposal for the deterrents. After that, if you need some extra ideas on how to sell the job, let me know. I'll help you sell. Most important thing, you get into the sales, and I do my whole module on selling. It's about asking the right questions. I will want even more evidence of questions that you asked your customer. That'll help me with you to sell the job. Commercial refinery birds only come in at sunset, leave in the morning, not nesting and not feeding. Well, that was, that can be a real problem when they're not nesting in there. But when you have a commercial refinery like that and they're using it for their night roost, you want to think about it the same way as nesting. So in other words, where are they going for that night roost? We want to attack that area. And this is where, with refineries, well, you saw the video from that power plant. Putting optical gel in the right area and getting them off of those areas can really throw off the entire population. So what we often see is we go in and we do a test area first. If you got a refinery and you're trying to solve the starlings, I'd love to see photos and help you with that one. That's something we can help you with. Let's see, Mike says, what is the best way to clean dryer vents? So the dryer vents, my understanding and my knowledge with the tools is, of course, is you have a long flexible pole that you're going to get down in all the way that can flex around corners to clean those out. And there are a couple tools that I've seen. So if you want to send me an email, I will send you some of those tools. It's not fail safe, on every situation. But send me a photo if you can. Like, I need to know how far in that vent is going and how many right angles are involved. Sometimes it's really simple. It's just a straight shot from the bathroom or the washer dryer area in a straight angle between floors out to the wall. And that could be kind of easy to clean out. Tyler says, will that give you similar results like you mentioned yesterday? Like they will move once and then leave the area after? As long as you collectively threaten the entire existence of that flock or their night roost, the answer is yes. Now, if you only are able to attack certain areas, then all you're going to do is move the population around that property, and the amount of volume is still going to increase. So that's where I say you have to think for the whole colony, the entire situation, and then work a strategy over time to reduce that whole population. With the video I showed you at the power plant, the beauty of that one was after the mess was cleaned up and the install was done, the flock came back for only a few hours, and then they realized they had to abandon that night. They come back again, they don't go into those cavities, and then they start searching for a new place to live and roost at night, which was the goal of what we were after. So that's it. Those are, as much as I have time for. I'm going to take a 2-minute break here. We have time to take a 2-minute break, and we're going to get into sparrows next. If there are more questions, let's go ahead and put my email up one more time. Zach will leave my email up. And please email me any questions with photos. I'll be glad to help you out. We'll see you in a couple minutes, and we'll start the next one. Thanks.